I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And I am excited today to have Aaron Fan on the show, which, you know, those who follow NHRL may obviously know him from there. But if you pay close attention to the whole BattleBots teams, you may know him from Team Sawblaze, who just won the World Championship, which was very exciting. So welcome to the show, Aaron.
Hello. Thanks for having me on. It's a real delight to talk with you, Christine.
Absolutely. Well, you know, your buddy JMO suggested that I speak to you, and I was like, well, you know, of course, that makes sense, because, you know, I love so much of what you've been involved in. So we'll get into a lot of that. But first, you know, since it just happened, let's talk a little bit about the World Championship. You know, I know that during that run that I thought it was such a great moment to show how emotional you were over just like what Sawblaze was able to do. So, you know, before we get into anything else, tell me a little bit about what your role is on Team Sawblaze, especially for those that may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, so on Sawblaze, like during the design and preparation for this year's event, I worked on basically rebuilding the whole electronic system from the ground up, with JMO's help and his advice on like, oh, we did this last year last year or some previous years, and against this opponent, it exploded, so we don't do that anymore. Yeah, we completely redesigned our drivetrain, and Sawblaze is a control robot, so drivetrain is like number one on that robot. Plus, it only has two wheels, so if one of them fails, it's all over. So we completely redesigned the drivetrain to be substantially more serviceable, more compact, and higher power, and importantly, more responsive. So I put in a lot of work into the motor controller tuning, and even since we're using VESCs, the software that they run is open source. So I even dug into that and did some firmware modifications to fix some gaps that I found in reliability and control. So that was my main focus prior to the event. And also, I guess did a lot of static proofing. So in the event, during filming, they have us in this big plastic tent with plastic floors, and in the dry Nevada air, all that plastic is very good at building up static charge. And static charge, for those who don't know, starts at about 2000 volts for the smallest of zaps. And when you're doing big zaps of maybe an inch long that you have at BattleBots Arena, that's about 10 to 15,000 volts coming out of your finger into your electronics. And when your electronics run at a mere 50 volts, that big of a difference kind of surprises them to the point of letting out smoke, so to speak. So I also did a lot of study on how to reinforce our electronics against this kind of static discharge, and coming up with team procedures on how to mitigating it, so that way we have as much defense as possible against the static discharge. And the team knows this because I believe it was last year where they got into the arena, was about to do the twitch, like the showboat at the beginning, and something on the arm controller straight up died. So tried very hard to avoid that situation, and we were very successful in doing that. And so, yeah, that's my, I guess, design phase role, primary role.
I mean, that's a lot. You're definitely responsible for a lot. And so, yeah, I could completely understand like seeing that work pay off and seeing, you know, everything come together would be really a big deal, you know, to watch that. Now, you know, I know that it was, you know, that match where kind of everything came out, but was that match, would you say, like the one that not necessarily meant the most, but just like that was the toughest, or just your favorite match, or was there a different match in the whole tournament run that you actually like enjoyed more?
Yeah, I guess we had something special for the monsoon fight. So one of the things that we found out only when we got to filming and put the robot in the test box and drove the robot on the actual arena floors that they use. We discovered during our safety check-in that our tires are way less abrasion resistant, and the floors are way more abrasive than we thought. Like in our as designed setup in the test box, we literally ground down our wheels to the point where we were sitting on the chassis and the wheels were basically free spinning, doing nothing. And so from then we had to like that's a real panic moment, because we had done probably about 1 minute of driving in the test box, and then within 1 minute we were basically squatting down and sitting on the floor, unable to move. Even if we basically lost to we would have been counted out against ourselves. So from the very first day, we had to start a research project on how to make these natural rubber wheels, how to make them big again after they've been worn down, and how to perhaps even find some kind of coating that's more abrasion resistant, so that way we get more runtime out of them. And in the meantime, we basically had to drive conservatively. So sharp-eyed viewers may have noticed a difference in Sawblaze's speed between the Hydra fight, which was the last time we had to drive conservatively, and the Blip fight, which we were able to pull out all the stops a bit more and like really put the pedal to the metal on Sawblaze. That was like the point where we had figured out a process for rebuilding the wheels. But what's interesting is, I guess at the Blip fight, we were still using the original wheels. We had figured out a process to rebuild them, but since it was such a experimental thing, not many materials stick to natural rubber. Even the polyurethane casting that we used to build up the wheels, that normally doesn't stick to natural rubber. Like you can just peel it off with your hands, like picking at it with your finger. And the BattleBots definitely exerts more force than someone idly picking at a tire with a finger. So we weren't running the new wheels in the Blip fight, because on our very first test, the first time that we rebuilt a pair of wheels, one of them came out great, and the other one literally shredded itself in the test box because somewhere in our process we didn't do something right, and the polyurethane casting went, nope, I'm not going to cure this time. I strongly suspect we just didn't mix it quite right. We didn't mix it quite enough, but it's a lot of steps, so that's still just a guess. So Flip fight, we had original wheels, but we had our like high speed options turned on. And so we thought, okay, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. Let's keep going with these like non-modified wheels that we used with Blip on the next fight, which is Monsoon. But in the test box, when we were while we had already weighed in, we were doing the pre-fight twitch test, making sure everything works before we go and line up in the box. And we found out that our robot was dangerously close to squatting down on the floor again. Like the bottom of the chassis was basically touching the floor. Like we had our ID badges, we tried to slip them in underneath the chassis. They couldn't fit underneath. So there's zero clearance. And in that moment, I had rebuilt a second wheel. But that one was untested. Like we haven't ran it in the test box or anything. But in that moment, we decided this definitely will not work for our next fight. It's time to use the new wheels. And that's when I got super nervous because we had one that was vetted and that was fine. But we had the other one, which in my mind at the time, because I hadn't proven the process yet, it had a 50% chance of working. And the 50% chance of basically shredding itself and leaving Sawblaze with just one wheel.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we just had to like put it on. You don't even have time to put it in the test box. It's just like a 1-for-1 replacement and then go line up in the arena. And as you can imagine, I was very nervous. And then yeah, so I guess in this good timeline, it worked. We actually never had any more casting failures. So that's why I'm pretty sure the process was just like the error in the process was just insufficient mixing. And yeah, the wheels worked from then on. Like every fight that we've seen so far has had from the monsoon fight up has had the rebuilt wheels.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely worked well. And that kind of goes along with something that I've observed as like a theme this season, where I think more than any other season that I've seen, so many fights were won based on really smart decisions by the teams and the drivers. And I think Sawblaze really exemplifies that. I know, obviously, JMO, he is a person that learns from everything that happens, and it seems like that's something that like the whole team embodies.
Yep, I'd say it's a pretty big part from what I've seen of, because I've only been on Sawblaze 1 year, but some other team members have been here for much longer. And it's definitely one thing I've observed is they basically nitpick at every single thing that went wrong, like big or small, because a lot of small things add up. And when you're able to have all the small stuff worked out, and you can basically take all your focus and put it on the big stuff. So like, yeah, they take an incredible amount of notes before and after each fight. So we have records of how like what we did on the robot prior to the fight and how all the damage, how everything ended up after the fight. At the end of the season, we had a big like complaint fest of everything that we want to improve. Even if it sounds silly and like we ultimately end up not doing anything about, it's good to have it in writing and have everyone else like see it and acknowledge potential faults.
Yes.
It's best to discover problems beforehand and not like after the fact.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's great. I mean, it was an amazing season. But let's talk about Ham. So for people who again that watch the NHRL events and things like that, which if for people that haven't, I highly recommend it. You may be familiar with such robots as Hamshake, which recently competed in January, Tale of Three Hams. So talk a little bit about this ham concept.
Yeah, so the ham robots was actually so it dates way back to 2013. 2013 Dragon Con and their 3-pound robot battles was the very first time the very first ham, which was just called Ham. So back in that time, the robot combat was in a bit of a lull because it's been quite a few years since the original BattleBots series had ended. I'm not very familiar with my televised BattleBots aside from the modern reboot. I think Robot Wars had not started yet. Something like that. But anyways, one way or another, the result was there was a bit of a lull in like small scale combat robots here. And so at Dragon Con, we would literally create spare parts, bracket stuffer robots. Because otherwise, like there would literally be dead time as waiting for opponents to repair really early in the bracket. And like the Dragon Con bracket was able to run without judges' decisions. They would just rerun matches until someone gets knocked out. So that gives you an idea on how much extra time we had. So anyways, back to Ham. So Ham was an ASBot, we call it, made in about 24 hours before the event from all the spare parts we had. And I remember for this one, the makerspace that I hung out at in Atlanta, where Dragon Con was held, they recently got a styrofoam, like a foam cutter. So I just kind of went nuts with a foam cutter and created this basically stack of foam. I can do a screen sharing too.
Oh yeah, you should be able to.
Okay, where do share screen? Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me fix that.
Well, to describe it for the audio listeners, it's basically a layer cake of styrofoam with a pair of eyes and a titanium mohawk. And then a pair of wheels that were geared way too high to make it utterly uncontrollable.
You should be able to share it now.
Okay. Hey, this one. So this is the original Ham, and it was called Ham because someone suggested it for the acronym, I guess, hard as metal, some could call it. But I didn't know about that acronym at the time. I just thought it meant cured meats. So that was the very first Ham. It didn't win any fights. Instead, got pushed into the sanding pit in the Dragon Con arena a lot. And so, but it was a lot of fun. And so then for Motorama the same year, we made Hamster Ball, which is a bit more thought put into it, but still very like, we got a few hours left before the competition. Let's make a bracket stuffer. This one has maybe like 2 pounds of steel in the base and designed to be a weeble wobble. So it is basically like a giant used up gyro of meat, except with styrofoam, and it cannot be knocked over because it just pops right back up. And so it basically runs around the arena like a target drone. But it was a lot of fun. And then the next one is a very famous Ham robot. This one is Ham Slicer. You can see some other people made Ham style robots, like the exit sign bot right behind it, which is constructed from a building's exit sign with a couple of wheels and a couple of eyes on. I believe this one pooped bouncy balls as it drove around. Ham Slicer has an articulated arm with an overhead bar, I guess kind of like Sawblaze, but angled differently. Instead of angled to the front, it angles to the side. And it has only one drive wheel from the start because I only had 2 motors. I needed one for drive and one for weapon. And so this robot, through some sheer stroke of luck and insanity, managed to get 2nd place at Dragon Con robot battles by just being too awkward and big to be hit. And through his overhead attacks, able to hit opponents from angles they don't anticipate, which sounds very familiar.
Yes.
And this one actually, we can see on the side a little Ultimaker logo. That's because this robot, the wooden parts are entirely old Ultimaker Generation 1 3D printer components. So we say this is not a 3D printed robot, but a 3D printer robot. And then there was Honey Baked Ham, this one reused a lot of parts from Ham Slicer, and this one competed at Motorama the next year. The lid is from a honey baked ham, like honey baked ham cooler that they ship ham in. Because
Okay.
at this time I lived in California, and I wouldn't. My parents would ship me a honey baked ham every Thanksgiving, and so I had a bunch of good old styrofoam laying around. The chassis on the bottom where the drive motors are, I believe those are 2 TV remotes I picked up at a thrift store taped together to add bulk.
That
And
is
then,
fantastic. And I love the googly eyes on the weapon.
yeah. Yeah, this robot was a difficult one to safety or to like put a safety lock on. They had done some shady things there. And then the next robot is a complete departure from the old designs. This one is Space Ham. While it still had that wooden base, this one is now a BristleBot with a ducted fan to help it move in the direction I want, because BristleBots tend to have a mind of their own. And it used a flip-flop that a friend left behind at my apartment when he was visiting. And so basically it buzzes around the arena, has that ducted fan, so it makes a big racket as it whirs around, and then it slaps people with the flip-flop, which I'm sure some people can relate to.
Absolutely.
This one competed at Dragon Con Robot Battles. It did, I think, only fought 1 match before getting pushed into the pit. But it also fought at a local event. What was it called? I forget, but it was just like a few friends getting together. And I believe it actually won a match there by outlasting the opponent's drivetrain. Then this one is a bit more refined because this is my first ant weight, which I still was kind of a last minute build. So this one is Ham Knife. This blade is actually the reused blade from Charles's 1-pounder pop quiz. Somehow I got a hold of it. I think it was left behind one year. Oh no, it was used for Ham Slicer. That's right. It was used for Ham Slicer, and then I kind of never gave it back. So that's one series of ham robots, and then it keeps going. This is what I have on my really out-of-date website. Let me flip around to here. And then there was an unknown ham bot, which I completely forgot the name of. Can we see? Does this show up fine?
Yeah.
So this ham robot is kind of in the style of Ham Slicer, but with 2 wheels instead of 1 and more wedge. And instead of having this titanium bar it swings around, it instead swings around a pair of polycarbonate flail ends, which definitely made the driving dynamics very interesting. And I don't remember where this was, to be honest. But it as always, it's a fun build. And so this now starts the era of collaborative ham robots. So first one was Tale of 2 Hams. So before Tale of 3 Hams, we had Tale of 2 Hams, which is built by myself and Jamison. And so we used this one at Dragon Con Robot Battles. And we did not get a weight bonus there's no weight bonuses. So we had to fit the weight of 2, what was the other one? I believe there's a vector beater kits. And a full drivetrain, and like double the chassis all in one robot. And so, yeah, this was the first time we did a collaborative ham robot where we basically agreed 1.5 pounds each, and there will be some kind of connecting bolt of this thread somewhere around this height, and that's it. And then when we actually met up at Dragon Con, because at this moment he lived in Massachusetts, I live in California. then is only then when we see each other's robot and connect them and like realize ham dreams. So that's the first one. The next one was green eggs and ham. We made it the year after. So this one is, I guess you can call it like a shell spinner or overhead beater. I created the core, this red part you see in the center. That part is completely independent and it's basically like a little shuttle that drives the other half of the robot around, which is also controlled independently, but it has a wheel on one side and an impactor on the other. And so one person basically it's like one person spinning in circles around the other person, and the one spinning in circles acts as the spinner. And so this one is also in the ham style. We agreed I would use like maybe a bit less than a pound on this one for a drivetrain, and I'll have a shaft of this size sticking out the middle, and he would build something that would clear a certain radius and would spin around a lot. This one we got a little fancy and has a bunch of LEDs on the impactor side to illuminate, so it made cool white circles as it spun around. And if I recall this match, we fought against the fingertech beater bar, and we were doing okay in the beginning, like we were able to spin up and push them around. Until they got us a real solid hit on the chassis and flipped us over. And with this design, there is no self-riding at all. And then finally, that brings us to our most famous ham. This was made with, this was a 3-person collaboration with our good friend Zoe. So he is the third part of the Fanwango team. And so this is like Tale of 2 hams, but more. So this is Tale of 3 hams with 3 different beater bars attached in a row using the non-traditional movement weight bonus. So each segment is able to weigh 1.5 pounds. And so I have a bit more. So we each built each segment independently. They all use 3 different beater kits. We have I said this earlier, I forget what kind of beater bar this is. It's a kit that's no longer made. The middle one is using a beater bar that Jamison made back in like 2012 for his beaterweight drum spinner named Cake. So built that and then used it a few times, and it's been sitting idle, so it's been put into service here. And the third one is a fingertech beater bar, everyone's favorite. And so the 2 outer modules have directional, not shufflers, but BristleBots, but with directional bristles. So it has some modicum of controllability, but BristleBot dynamics are weird. And for example, my side definitely likes going backwards way better than it goes forwards. And yeah, we each had customizations of Go Ham, Zoe Ham, Mo Ham. Due to a lack of planning, Zoe Ham had to be installed upside down. And then they each connect. We had the same plan of like, we just defined an interface at a certain height to connect to. And also due to a lack of planning, our interface ended up being different threads. Luckily, it's into plastic, so I was able to just DIY thread it. Jamison did not like that. He's much more of a cut the threads properly rather than form them in place. And then that leads, so actually I have my section of Tale of 3 hams right here. This is the Mo ham section. I'll think of a use for it someday. The components are still pretty all right. And
Yeah.
then that brings us to Hamshake, which I have here, which is a droopy style robot that is a gyro walker, except each half was in the ham style, independently designed. We just agreed on these two, the position of these two mounting bolts and the weight limit. And as such, they're independently controlled. So while droopy, normally controlling a droopy type robot requires coordination because you have to spin up the left side and spin up one side, spin down the other side to move. And you also have to do it for a very controlled amount of time to not turn completely around. Well, in this case, we had to synchronize externally. And so you can see in some of the fights when we were bouncing up and down, that's literally us trying to keep time with each other to make proper steps. And yeah, it did all right. This robot in the January event, the new robots event, actually went to, what's the term? Quarterfinal? It was one fight away from qualifying for
Okay.
the December finals, which is honestly better than every other robot I've made for Norwalk. So even the ones I try really hard on.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know there were many people that were big fans of that robot and were really wanting to see it come to the May event and possibly fight Droopy. That didn't end up happening, obviously, but it would have been cool to see. But you also, of course, have Pensive Prosciutto, and you're going to be bringing that to the next event in June here.
Yep, Pensive Prosciutto. Pensive Prosciutto is actually, I guess, a spiritual successor to Green Eggs and Ham, in that the original plan was to do something just like it, have some kind of ring or overheads, some kind of ring spinner with an external drive and an internal core that kind of just pushes the ring along as it spins. But I realized maybe it's better to, instead of pushing against the ground, which is unpredictable, push against the core itself. And then from then on, I kind of evolved into a more traditional ring spinner design, although with a twist to help reliability. So when I was thinking about driving against the ground, I thought, well, I'm gonna have to be somewhat compliant to handle stuff on the ground, like holes, divots, debris. So I might need some kind of suspension. But then when I just, instead of driving against the ground, driving against the core, I thought, why don't we just keep that same suspension idea? And so Pensive Prosciutto is a ring spinner with internal suspension system between the ring and the core. So that kind of just is, so it basically floats the ring on springs, and the ring only touches the core on hits. So a lot of the impacts all of the high strength, like the high load impacts, can be transmitted through sliders instead of bearings, and sliders are way more durable. And they're able to use probably the least number of bearings in any ring spinner ever built, which is I think including the shufflers, 12 bearings, which is still a lot of bearings, but it's an improvement. And here I have a picture of the suspension system, because currently Pensive Prosciutto is in pieces on my desk. Here's the ring, and here's the old core I used in the previous Norwalk, which has the new spike drive system that did not work, and then the new core in the prototype. But if I share this image, this is, here we can see it has the springs in like a triangle configuration, pushing rollers against the ring. Those keep the ring from touching any kind of load bearing slider until it gets hit. And then of course it's a shuffler style. Actually, the shuffler style is what gives the robot the other half of its name. So it's called prosciutto because it started as a ham robot, but it got too fancy, too serious. So what is kind of a fancy ham is prosciutto.
That is
And
true.
and then I used Jamison very graciously lent me the design of his Silent Spring shufflers, which I later modified and iterated on. So these shufflers are a lot more compact to fit in this ring profile, in this ring shape. But as like a tribute to that, I needed it had some kind of silent, or in this case, pensive adjective in it. So that's why it's called pensive prosciutto.
That makes a lot of sense now. I'm really excited to see it with the modifications, and especially, you know, you mentioning that JMO kind of let you have the information for that design. It could be interesting if Pensive Prosciutto and Silent Spring end up fighting each other in the June event.
We actually have fought each other before. In last year sometime, we have fought. It was in one of the arenas. They're still working out one of the steel arenas, I think they call it. The ones on the side and the outside of the main spectator area, they're still working out the kinks and getting those set up. So it was unfortunately an unfilmed fight, but we did fight. He used the undercutter and I was doing my thing with Pensive Prosciutto, and it came to a very close judge's decision. That it was one of the more interesting judges' calls. He won it, but it was close. It was real close.
Yep. So sometimes that's how it goes.
Yep, as they say, that's what happens when you leave it to a judge's decision.
Yes. Yes, exactly. No, that's awesome. You know, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I'm sure a lot of fans are. We only have a little less than a month until the event, so you know, I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun getting it all fixed up and ready to go.
Yep, it's basically done. I just need to get off my butt and actually assemble it. The new drivetrain, the spike plan was an attempt to make, I guess, an inertial walker, but with only one spinner and using two hardened steel spikes poke into the ground on servos. And so one side will lift up, one side of the spike will lift up, one side of the spike would poke down, and it would pivot around that spike, and then it would switch and it would pivot around the other spike. But it turns out that 3-pound robots don't have enough weight to really push those spikes into the ground. And then so it starts spinning, it starts sliding. And then matte paint is ever so slightly abrasive, but it is abrasive. And the power of the ring drive would spin the core, and within like maybe 2 seconds, grind those spikes down to flats, and then I had no more traction. So if you look at the fights from the previous, or not the May, but the one before March, Norwalk, you see Pensive Prosciutto doing an excellent job in spinning itself up and not the ring, like the core and not the ring.
Well, you know, that's exactly like kind of what we talk about, though, with like you see that and you learn from that, and then you're able to correct it for the next event. So obviously, best of luck there. Everybody should watch because it's going to be an amazing event. But you know,
definitely.
For everyone that is watching, please make sure that, you know, if you haven't already, that you subscribe, continue to like these interviews and comment and share and all of that good stuff. Keep supporting combat robotics, and you know, build a robot. That's cool too. So we'll see everyone next time on the show.